Please welcome Cynthia Nixon and Terence Davies. Before we'll turn it over to the audience for some Q&As eventually, but just to get started, Terence, this is your first, I hate using the word biopic, but this is your first drama based on the life of a real person, and that's a big change in your career. Can you talk about your approach and how did you feel fidelity? Because obviously it's a very written and beautifully constructed fictional film in its way. So how did you approach your first biopic?
Well, I discovered her poetry when I was 18 on television. Claire Bloom was reading her poetry. The first one was Because I Could Not Stop for Death, He Kindly Stopped for Me. So I ran out and bought it. Never thought, I was still a lowly bookkeeper in an accountancy practice. And then about 6 years ago, I started rereading the poems and realized just how wonderful they are. And then I decided I really had to know more about her. And I read 6 biographies, I beg your pardon. And this really intrigued me, because here's this woman who withdraws from the world, writes this wonderful poetry, and has this extraordinary rich inner life. Because you don't have to go all over the world to have an inner life. You can stay in one place. But what drew me to it was her spiritual quest. She oscillates between, is there a God? Is there not a God? Is there a soul? Is there not a soul? If there's a soul and there's no God, what do you do? And I had that crisis when I was a very devout Catholic until I was 22. So I really responded to that. But also the fact that she wasn't recognized in her own lifetime, that more than anything else really, in a way, sort of angered me. I thought she deserved to be better known. It's wonderful poetry. I think she's the greatest American poet of the 19th century. That's why I wanted to do it.
And I mean, all of the films that you've made that aren't based on your childhood, they have very strong and very skeptical, often female protagonists. You just really seem to identify with these women. Can you talk a little bit about, it just reminds me so much of House of Mirth and Deep Blue Sea. There really seems to be a connection you have with these women.
But probably it's the story. I mean, they happen to be women. But when I was growing up, all the big hits of the period were all about women. Love Is a Many Splendid Thing, Magnificent Obsession, All That Heaven Allows. They were the big hits of the period. So I grew up with that, and I grew up with my sisters and my mother. I mean, I'm the youngest of 10, 7 surviving. But I loved my sisters and their friends. Their friends came round on a Friday, and I was allowed to go for the makeup, and I can still smell Fridays. So this part of that is true as well. But also, I think what is true is I think that because Emily she's an ordinary human being, but she happens to be a genius. She has one layer missing. So she responds to the world in a very, very visceral way. And she's, in a way, an outsider. And I've always been an outsider. I've never been a participant in life. I've always been an observer. I wouldn't do anything sort of adventurous or dangerous. I'm too afraid. I'm far too timid. So I know what that feels like.
And so you could both answer this one. At what point did Cynthia come aboard to portray Emily Dickinson? It seems, now that we've seen it, it seems like a natural choice. But how did the relationship first happen? Who contacted who?
Well, we met about 4, 5, 6 years ago about a film we didn't get the money for. I'd never forgotten her. And when I started writing the script, one of my producers, Sol, was also a stills photographer. And there's only one extant photograph of Emily when she's 17. And I said, well, he said, I'll superimpose Cynthia's face on it. And she looks exactly like her. And I knew she was right. I saw her face when I was writing the 3 drafts, and I just hoped that she would say yes. She said yes, and she stuck with it for 4 years. So she was very, very loyal to the project. And if she had said no, I have no idea who I would have cast.
So tell me, Cynthia, when you first came onto this project.
Yes, well, as I said, as Terence said, we met. He auditioned me for a film that never came off, and then I hadn't heard from him. And a few years after that, I received this offer, this amazing script, a biography of Emily Dickinson, and Terence asking if I would play Emily Dickinson. And I was completely overwhelmed, but I was less overwhelmed than I might have been because I thought, well, that's a very nice idea that will never happen. I've been paid a tremendous compliment, and I'll always have that to, keep in my pocket and sort of rub it when I'm feeling a little blue. But then, they pulled it off. It was amazing. And I do feel a natural choice to play Emily Dickinson, and I've been a fan of hers. My mother was a huge fan of hers, and so I kind of grew up with her in the house with Julie Harris's Belle of Amherst, but also Julie Harris. We had a record in our house of Julia Harris reading some of the most famous poems and some of the better-known letters, and that we would listen to a lot. So it penetrated my consciousness, and of course there's a way that great writing that you actually hear over and over gets in your brain more than if you read it on the page. So, and I think as a young person, I really identified with the kind of shyness that she felt, but also how she felt that there were just great worlds inside her, if only, someone might take the trouble to go over and peer in. And I felt a lot like that when I was a kid.
Well, it's a profoundly insular performance. You really feel like the viewer is just looking right inside you at all times. How did you, what was your approach to the character? Because it really is, almost everything she's feeling just feels like it's right there in your face.
Well, I think that's one of the things that Terence thought I would be good, because things flicker across my face a lot. But I do think that, it's very interesting. She's such a major poet, and she's beloved by so many people, certainly in the United States, but all over the world. And it's really interesting that the Belle of Amherst aside, no one has ever tried to make a movie about her before. But I think it's probably how dauntingly interior her life was. But I think that, it takes a filmmaker like Terence to understand that just because you spend a lot of time indoors doesn't mean don't travel very, it doesn't, and your acquaintanceship is limited, your face-to-face acquaintanceship is very, very narrow and very limited in a certain way. I think that Terence understands that there can be very enormous, very dramatic worlds in there. So I think that certainly Terence was very focused on, and I think he did a really great job of, that these were people who live in a more formal time than we did, but that doesn't mean that they're, from Madame Tussauds. They have feelings. Arguably, they have feelings even stronger than our feelings because there's less outlet for them. So I think that, and Terence is very dramatic, emotional person, and so I think he made sure that we didn't stint on those exchanges being very impassioned ones.
One more question about that before I want to turn it over to the audience. But it has a musical quality. Certainly the way you recite the poetry actually becomes the soundtrack for most of it. And there's also almost a rhythmic, balletic quality to the movements of the actors throughout the frames. I'm just wondering the working relationship in creating this really amazingly composed experience.
But they're human beings, they happen to be, she happens to be a genius, but they're human beings, they get up, they get washed, they bake bread, they eat, all of those things. So it's got to be true. And I've said to everyone in all the films, I don't want you to act, I want you to be. And that's a very big thing to ask, because what actors do, they open their heart to you, and you have to respect that, but you have to open your heart to them as well, and respond to what they do. There were times when I couldn't call cut. I was so moved by the playing, particularly the death of the mother. I mean, my other producer, Roy, I said, will you go on and call cut? I said, I cannot go on. I was so moved. And the monitor was still on. And he said, cut. And they all reacted, said, would you want to do it again? You think, how? How? That's what's extraordinary about actors. And I do love them, I must say, for the risks they take. But it's got to be true. And cinema captures not only the fleeting moment, it captures insincerity as well. And you can't get away from it. I mean, even in the greatest films, there's moments where you think, they haven't really pulled this off. I mean, Letter from an Unknown Woman, which is one of the great films of unrequited love. There's one point when Joan Fontaine puts her son to bed and begins to weep, but goes like this and turns away from the camera, and she cries into the curtain, and you know she couldn't cry. I mean, you can just tell it's not real crying. It's the only false moment in it, but it captures the fleeting moment of small things that become huge on a screen this size. You have to go for that. If it's true, then you're all right. You know you're on good ground. When it starts to be acted, you think, oh dear.
Turning it over to the audience. Yes, right here. Yep. Yeah, there might. Yes, the mic will be passed down.
Congratulations to you both. Wonderful film. This question is for you, Cynthia. By the way, you look lovely. That's a lovely red.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I was watching you, I was reminded of Dustin Hoffman, because once upon a time he talked about how difficult it was for him as an actor to do Rain Man, because he just laid himself so bare. And I wondered, could you talk a bit about how you prepared for this role as an actor, and any sort of difficulty you had in just bringing us into your soul the way you did in this role?
Thank you. Well, I think it was very helpful. We shot, surprisingly, in Belgium. So we were very removed from our families, and I think that was actually helpful. And, you know, Jennifer Ely and I have known each other for many years, although not well, but we have all sorts of funny connections. And so she and I were very close during the filming, and that really helped. And I think Terence, you know, chose wonderful actors, but who also had an enormous amount of enthusiasm for the project. And so I think we all were aware of this rare experience we were being given, and we were treated with such sensitivity, and we treated each other that way. And I guess, as I said, less nowadays, but I still remember the person that I was, the child, and particularly the teenager that I was, that related so strongly to Emily. And so I don't know, I feel like I have a lot of Emily inside me, even though she might be a little more, you know, buried nowadays in the functionality of my life as a mother of 3, et cetera, et cetera. And my best friend is a very Emily Dickinson person. And yeah, I mean, I think that in this modern world, we either, it depends on how you think of it, we either don't have the luxury, or we're able to avoid feeling things so sensitively, as if our one layer of skin had been removed. But that's what we're all really like. It just depends on how much armor we've put on. And so I feel like that part of me is still very close to the surface, even though it might be covered up for function.
Right here in the front.
Hi guys, thank you. Archer, I'm from New York. It's a beautiful film, very well acted, of course. Wonderful performance, Cynthia. Question I had for Emily Dickinson's work is it talks a lot about death and immortality, and the film deals with that subject. But I think that's something all artists have in them. The desire to not die, to be remembered and be there. So as filmmaker and an actor yourself, can you talk about your perspective on that and how that was part of this? I mean, making this film, how did that affect your thought process in that direction, the desire of an artist to live forever?
That's rather hard to answer. I love the poetry, but I also am moved by the tragedy of her not being recognized when she was alive. And I feel the same way about Anton Bruckner, who only had one success at the 8th Symphony. The rest of the time, nobody would play them. And But what was also crucial is that she is to be human. She has to be bitter. She has to be funny. She has to like to dance. She loves to play the piano. All those things have got to be there as well. Because at the end of the day, no matter how gifted someone is, to put it bluntly, we all go to the lavatory and we all fart in the bath. That's the truth of the matter. But when somebody is denied recognition, and they are artists, great artists like this, there's something in me which really warms to them, and I want to fight their corner. It's too late in a way now, because she's dead, and she won't know. Or if she does somehow know, I hope she's looking down and thinking, I feel a poem coming on.
I think that wanting to live forever is not exclusive to artists. I mean, I think we're all terrified of death if we only think about it and wish it would go away, and it wasn't so. But I think the difference between Emily and most people in the world is that, you know, most of us do our best not to look over in that direction, you know, because life is very hard to live with the knowledge of death, and both the knowledge that death exists and the uncertainty about when death will come. But I think that's one of the amazing things about Emily is her strength at looking so unstintingly at death and trying to make sense of it. So to me, the fact of wanting her verse to live after she dies, to me that's not why she's so focused on death. I think she's focused on death because she's so deeply curious about what, if anything, comes after, but also, you know, she's living her life with that knowledge, keeping that knowledge in front of her face that most of us choose not to do.
And we forget that those days people died at home. Lots of people died, and they died very young. I mean, even in my time, in the 50s, my father died at home over 2 years. You know, so you were very close to it. You know, death now has been shunted to the side. Death only happens to other people. And unfortunately, it happens to us all.
Anyone else? Okay, right here.
Hi, how you doing? Oh, thank you. Hey, I have two questions, one for each of you. The first one for Mr. Davis. I really enjoy how you write your dialogue, and specifically in the beginning of the picture, the speed of it. And I was curious as to, was that something that you thought about as you were writing and in development, or was that something that formed organically while during filming? And for you, Ms. Nixon, when you play characters who, in a broad sense, are extremely detached humans, what do you use to help you perform in scenes that require you to deeply connect with your other actors?
Well,
Dialogue question first.
the opening is very simple. It's the oldest trick in the cinematic book. What do we want to know at the beginning of a film? We want to know who it's about and where it's set. Simple as that. You get that in the first 2 minutes. But if you start it when there are a group of people and you don't know who they are, and then you cut to someone who's got a major speech, you still don't know who it's about. Gradually, they fall away, and we now know who it's about. But it's a dead simple trick. I mean, it really is so simple. It's as simple as that, honestly.
I think that, so one of the things that Terence has always said during this process, for years, is that he didn't want it to be like a masterpiece theater, staid and, humorless, that he wanted it to be funny. And so I think that having things move at the beginning at a fast clip, first of all, the first thing that it shows is how smart these people are and how quickly they think, because they think quickly and they speak quickly. But to me, it seems that the other reason he does that is because he's so deeply interested in the silences. And if you have a slow film with then you have a lot of silences, everyone has left the theater. But if you have a quick film and then you have a silence, it's so powerful and it's so alive. You've earned your silence, right? But I think in terms of, I'm very confused that you say that she's detached, because she seems to me the least detached person there ever was, and that even when she physically, removes herself into her room and above the stairs where she won't come down, she's doing her best to physically remove herself because she's so, vibrating with, love and longing and anger and regret and, envy and a million different things. And in terms of, it's you just sort of try anything that works. As I said, it's very lucky that Jennifer and I were so devoted to each other during the filming. But I also think you have to do a mix of trying your best to connect with the other actors, but also what I like to do is when we have a scene about a particular thing that might be difficult or painful, I like to engage my fellow actor in a conversation about things in my own life that remind me of what the scene is about. And then invariably, actors like to talk and share, and they'll talk about things themselves. So at least we'll then each be in the right kind of frame of mind when we'll bring all the things that from our own life that we feel similarly about to the scene that we're about to shoot.
Right back there. Yes, she's with it blonde. Yes, there.
Hi, thank you very much. Cynthia mentioned earlier about the modern world, and for both of you, I'm just wondering, when we watch a film like this, how much has really changed in the modern world in terms of feminism and what she's saying?
In the modern world, there's all these fights that Emily has about as a woman being taken seriously. How different is the time that we're living in now? In the modern world, is the modern world very different from this film?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest, because the way culture seems to be going, it would appear, at least on the surface, that we are all equal. It would appear, but whether that's the case or not, I don't know. The problem with the modern world, and this is not an opinion, this is a prejudice. I'm a complete technophobe. I can't use anything. And because it's now so technically based, I think it's almost a denial of life, real life. And also the level of narcissism is now so shocking. I mean, why do you want to take a photograph of yourself eating a meal? Why? And then you watch television, and it's even more depressing. Because for the slightest thing, everybody speaks in this messianic way. That, if you start to do this workout, you'll have a beach body. Well, supposing you don't want one, what do you do then? I don't understand the modern world. And I certainly don't understand it from a woman's point of view, because, as you probably guessed, I'm not a woman. So I've no idea about the modern world. I'm completely confused by it all the time.
I think that things are very different now than they were, but I think that the thing is what was happening in the 19th century and the battles that people were fighting, against slavery and for female emancipation as well. I think we're still fighting those very same battles, and I think those battles that were identified in the 19th century and earlier, but the 19th century was really a crystallizing time. I think they set the agenda, and I think we still have the same agenda, and we're still fighting for very similar things, although we might be farther down the road, but the people who think that those who are on the other side and think that those things are, that kind of equality is not, oh, you're making such a fuss. I mean, people who say to you, "You're making such a fuss," would have said it in the 19th century in a very similar way. And to say that there was more violence used then than there is now is not true. And I think that obviously at a time when people didn't know whether it was appropriate for a woman to be a published writer, and even the woman herself maybe was not sure about that. That's a very far cry when we're looking at our first female president. But the forces that oppose that idea are still very strong and still very, very opposed.
But also one mustn't forget that there were lots of ladies' seminaries in this country, far ahead of their time, and you became a student, you graduated, and you became a teacher, and that you had to leave the job if you got married. But that was a lot of these seminaries. These women were very, very learned. Emily and I think very, very much like the Brontes, they were very well read, very well read. So we shouldn't forget that either.
But the question is, right, is their education, is it, for them it might have been very important, but for the people who were, educating them or deciding their daughters should be educated, was it ornamental, or were they supposed to then go out and do something with it? And I think even Emily struggles with that, right? Mm-hmm. Is it appropriate for me to publish and sell my wares in the marketplace?
One of the paradoxes is you get this good education, and then what do? You can't get a job because that would be considered not the done thing. Although it was not quite the case in England. With people like George Eliot, they were known to be women. When it was revealed that Jane Eyre had been written by a woman, it caused a sensation. But she was then appreciated for the fact that she'd written this great novel, because it was extraordinary for its time. That story is extraordinary, and she lived all her life in a Yorkshire parsonage.
Well, we have Louisa May Alcott and Harriet Beecher Stowe. They, amazing too, but again, very, very, very rare. And many people frowned upon what they did, too, so, yeah.
But they were the pioneers.
Yes, yes.
I'm afraid we have to wrap it up there, but good place. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.